Ready on the stump? Yeah. Okay. Here we go. I am somebody. I am somebody. I may be poor. But I am somebody. I may be young. But I am somebody. I may be on welfare. But I am somebody. I may be small. But I am somebody. I may make a mistake. But I am somebody. My clothes are different. My face is different. My hair is different. But I am somebody. I am black, brown, white. I speak a different language. But I must be respected, protected, never rejected. I am God's child. I am somebody. Give yourself a big hand.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Season 9, Episode 2 of the Justice Beat Talk Show. This is a podcast where we explore the intersections of justice, psychology, education, social systems, and what they mean for real people. And today's episode focuses on a topic that challenges how we think about accountability, opportunity, and transformation. It is education inside prisons. And so across the United States, incarceration has often been framed as punishment, but what happens when we introduce rigorous higher ed into these spaces? And what does it mean to view education not as a privilege, but as a pathway to dignity, growth, and structural change? And so programs like the University Without Walls State-Filled program and a Northwestern Prison Education program are reimagining what access to higher education can look like, even inside these facilities. But these initiatives also raise deeper questions like, what is prison abolition really about? How does education intersect with justice reform? And can learning itself become a tool for transformation, not just for individuals, but for systems as a whole? And so to help us unpack some big questions, we've been joined by Dr. Erica Miners, a professor at Northeastern Illinois University and a leading scholar and advocate working at the intersection of education, incarceration, and abolition. Dr. Miners has been deeply involved in prison education initiatives that bring accredited college programs into Illinois correctional facilities, and her scholarship challenges us to rethink the relationship between schools, prisons, and public policy. And so in today's conversation, we'll be breaking the topic down into 4 parts, from her path into this work, to how prison education functions in practice, to the broader abolitionist framework behind it, and finally, to what this means for communities and the future of justice reform. So Dr. Miners, thank you so much for joining us on the Justice Beat. We're really excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me this morning. And I just wanted to send deep appreciation for the 9 seasons of this podcast. We need grassroots journalism now more than ever. And I'm really honored to be in conversation with all of you and the legacy of this really important media initiative. And I'm also excited to be in conversation because I'm here in Illinois in my closet in my basement. And we are pushing forward this year on a No New Prisons campaign in the state of Illinois. And it's precisely the right moment to be talking about prisons and incarceration, as the state of Illinois is planning on building 2 new programs. And a central theme of the framework and the media around these 2 new prisons is that these 2 new prisons or prison rebuilds are going to be programming prisons, right? Including gender responsive services, but also education. So I think it's exactly the moment to be asking hard questions about what futures we are building in the now, and what it really means to support people to have access to meaningful, high quality, free post-secondary education.
Yeah, totally. Can you kind of tell listeners a little bit about your journey into education, how you became involved in this work?
Sure. It's a huge, big question. I'll give you maybe the Cliff's Notes version. If you haven't noticed from my slight vowels, I'm Canadian. I'm born north of the 49th parallel, where I had most of my access to formal education. I went to university in part because it was a one-page application form and it was almost free, right? And I also looked around and saw the kinds of jobs that were available in my community, and I wanted a different possibility. And I was growing up in small town British Columbia, and post-secondary education at that time was what I like to call the queer escape route that was available, of course, in part because I was white and I had some mobility. But it was a possibility to get out. So I went to school, and I moved to Chicago 25 years ago, fell in with radical Catholic sisters who were doing interesting work and important work on the west side of Chicago. And I fell in with organizations like Critical Resistance that got me to think about that important question that Angela Davis asked decades ago: are prisons obsolete? Which is a question that I'm still trying to work with other people to push and to learn and unlearn. But in direct response to your question, I have some access to formal education, of course, and I appreciate you calling me Dr. Miners, but please call me Erica. Almost all the powerful learning that I have done, or the unlearning that I've done in my life, has been because of working collectively with people in social and political movements to build the communities that we need, to struggle to build the communities that we need now. And that has been some of the most important and powerful education that has transformed me.
I really appreciate your very detailed response. Good to know you've been in Chicago for that long as well. So you're pretty familiar with kind of, the systems here in Chicago as well. And specifically, what drew you to be more involved in prison education programs?
I think I was pulled a little kicking and screaming into sort of prison education. And I want to put like little artificial quotes around that because, I'm committed to access to teaching and learning for everyone, everywhere, free, high quality teaching and learning, whether that's creative work in basements, in mosques, in synagogues, in community centers, and potentially in formal education spaces. And I started working with a group of comrades probably 16 or 17 years ago. We were pulled into Stateville Prison, which at the time was a maximum security prison about 2 hours outside of Chicago. Folks there were wondering, why there were people, where were the organizers from Chicago? And we started to do just kind of travel to the prison, do community conversations, bring in outside organizers and artists and scholars, a wonderful array of art makers coming into Stateville Prison. And after a couple of years of kind of doing work at Stateville Prison with people inside Stateville Prison, folks were interested in also having access to a degree program. And I teach at Northeastern Illinois University, and we have a wonderful program on campus called the University Without Walls that has been a really important program to allow people who are returning adults or coming back to school to finish a degree. And often people in prison, especially in a maximum security prison, have a whole host of credits, associate degrees, and a lot of competencies, college level competencies. Maybe they might not have taken a criminal justice 101 class or a sociology, race and society class at the 300 level, but they have that analysis from doing everything from being formal or informal paralegal to supporting people with grief work to all kinds of work that they've done in creative production. So we started that program, and at that, about over a decade ago. And when we started, we were relatively antagonistic towards the prison. They weren't that interested in, teaching and learning inside. They saw us sort of as a nuisance, and they weren't, they were happy to sort of take our accomplishments, but they weren't, interested in supporting the work. But we started that initiative in part because people inside asked for it, but we also were as committed to, as an organization, to multiple other initiatives, trying to do organizing work with people inside, trying to support people inside. Illinois doesn't have parole. We have a legislation in Illinois called Truth in Sentencing. And what, for example, my inside comrade, Devon Terrell reminded me years ago, of course I want to be educated, but I always want to be more than simply an educated prisoner. And so we knew that education was a potential lever, one potential plank, degree earning, credentialed education. But as important was the organizing, bringing outside people in, getting inside voices out, and also trying to, challenge systems, right? United States, as I'm sure your audience knows, has 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's incarcerated, and it's certainly not arbitrary, who is targeted, for being incarcerated, who is criminalized, who's locked up, and trying to build movements to challenge that was always kind of a plank in the work when we started, and continues to be a plank. We still need people to come home. We still need mechanisms to address harm that don't involve putting more police on the streets, building bigger borders between us and other nations, or, as the state of Illinois has currently proposed, building 2 new prisons with the starting price tag of $1 billion when we have 12,000 empty beds already in the state of Illinois. So really, trying to think about, how we can use education, whether it's, at the site of my university, whether it's political education in neighborhoods, whether it's teaching and learning that happens behind bars in support of movement building. That has always been my interest and the interests of the colleagues and comrades, anywhere that I work alongside, building freedom.
Definitely. And I think that there's kind of this common public reaction of like incarcerated individuals aren't deserving of a college education, or, what are they going to do with that once they, go out into their communities? And so how would you kind of respond to that argument?
That same argument is used kind of across the board, right? I teach at a public university that works with a lot of what is often known as non-traditional students, right? And tuition at my public university, when I started there 25 years ago, we were the cheapest 4-year university in the state. And that was important because access was important. I got to university because it was less than $1,000 a year, right? And tuition has increased because the state of Illinois has really withdrawn from their commitment to supporting public open access higher education. So I offer that just gentle pushback to say that, that same rhetoric of meritocracy, one might say, is leveled against all kinds of communities. Why in Chicago public schools do we have some young people that the high school experience that they get is a Department of Defense run high school, right? And yet other young people in Chicago go to a wonderful, amazing, high quality public high school that has, art, and a working TV studio and multiple languages. We have this kind of logic of there are the best of the best and the worst of the worst, and we all sort of should fall on that spectrum. And I think we want to be challenging that across the spectrum, whether it's that logic that says that people in prison don't deserve aren't meritorious. I mean, that, if we accept that there, we also are accepting it in our high schools, we're accepting it in our public universities. And I think a best of the best always requires a corollary, the worst of the worst. And very importantly, that logic is never race and gender neutral, class neutral, right? We know who falls on the best of the best, and we know who falls on the worst of the worst, and who is, kind of mediating that spectrum. So, I think we want to push back whenever we hear that meritocratic, that, racialized, heterogendered, classed, meritocratic logic surface to say these people don't deserve that, right? Or, those young people, actually, they're going to get their leadership through a Department of Defense run public high school, right? Or those young people only deserve, not to, a trade school program, right? Everybody deserves access to flourishing opportunities, right? Whether that's, whether that is, doing amazing welding work, or, or creating poetry, everybody deserves those opportunities. And I just raise that because, of course, the prison system is also run by guards, right? Which are often working class, people of color, especially in the Chicago areas. And it's not like somebody's 11 years old and wakes up, I want to be a prison guard, right, as a job. So I think we owe it to ourselves, to our communities, to kind of rethink, opportunities for across the spectrum. So yes, that was my, meta reframing of your question. But your question was about, yes, often people make the argument that people inside don't deserve resources, and I think that is that an extension of that logic is what we're seeing on the streets in Chicago today, or Minneapolis and Chicago, of ICE agents, that are masked, and armed in unmarked vehicles, snatching people off the street because they don't deserve, to be working in childcare in our children's elementary schools, or they don't deserve to be our neighbors. I think that anywhere we see that logic, anywhere we see those practices of state violence, racialized state violence, we should call that out. We should say that's not the vision, that's not the world that we want to live in.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and kind of going off of that, research does suggest that, higher education in prison and actually reduces recidivism and improves reentry outcomes. And so kind of beyond those statistics, beyond what's currently out there, the research that's being done, what human shifts do you see in your work? How do students, engage in their academic work?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I'm sure you and all of your listeners, we've all been transformed or engaged by being in relation to other people, by struggling over hard ideas, by thinking about, the conversations and the teaching and learning I've been privileged to do in a whole range of settings, the prison, the university, community context, as a learner, as a teacher, as a collaborator. Those change us. They always change us, whether it's, brilliant ideas by, the poet and thinker Audre Lorde, the revolutionary George Jackson, I referenced Angela Davis's beautiful "Are Prisons Obsolete?" question. I mean, I know all of us can, probably, name a moment where our thinking, because we were in relation to other people, often in relation to, a dialogue, a conversation, a text, a film, that makes us think differently. We were just talking a little bit, as I came on the podcast this morning with one of your backhand people about how, they're new to this work that the podcast has been covering, and it's really changed them. So I just want to lift up that. I think the mainstream narrative is, of course, that education in prison reduces recidivism. And I think we don't want to just reanimate that logic, right? Because I don't think it gets us anywhere. I think we want to acknowledge, a universal truth that being in relation, to other people, to struggle, to questions that are hard, that might not have an easy answer, continues to change, all of us, right? And I want to just like lift that up a little bit.
Absolutely, for sure. And I liked how, I mean, you kind of touched on this before, but specifically for the programs that are implemented, you mentioned that individuals can actually go back and kind of finish degrees that they were in the process of getting before they were incarcerated. Can you tell me a little bit more about because I know when people imagine a college classroom, they imagine, a campus or, but what does that education actually look like inside prison walls?
Yeah, there's a documentary that's circulating right now called The Alabama Project, and so I haven't seen it, but it's been comrades that recommend it, so I would encourage people to look at it just to get a sense of what a little bit about a visual about what life is like inside. So I have been involved with the University Without Walls program, which is a program that's also available on my campus, Northeastern Illinois University. It's an amazing program, a small program, and it's really a program designed for, what we often call non-traditional learners, but most learners now are non-traditional. It's people that are coming back to school and they have a lot of maybe credits. They have a lot of college level learning. They've maybe created curriculum. They've written books of poetry. They've worked as a paralegal. They've worked, building a community-based organization. And for some reason, they would like a degree. They would either like to go on to graduate school, or they would like to move up in a job, or they just want a sort of a validation of having, that credential. And so that program has been a pretty significant pathway in Chicago and beyond for people to use their prior college level learning and move it into a degree format. So when we were working inside, and, I was, working with people who were responsible for introducing legislation in the state of Illinois, who were building community-based organizations, who'd written, amazing law review articles. Shout out Joe Dole, who really, it seemed, as you pointed out, when we think about a traditional student, they're 18, to 22, they take English 100, they take full-time study. That model of 4 years of study didn't seem relevant or useful, just like it's not relevant or useful for many of the wonderful non-traditional or adult learners I work with, who aren't locked up, right? So it seemed like a natural connection, right? So we transfer as many credits as we can. We try to look at each student who's entering the program, whether they're incarcerated or not, and do an evaluation of the prior level college learning. And then we make a sort of tailored program or curriculum for them. And, most of the people that we worked with who were locked up had so much prior level college level learning, in part because they were old like me and they had, done a significant amount of work, both organizing at the site of the prison, building organizations, writing, doing all kinds of creative production, beautiful art production. But of course, I think you were asking sort of about the conditions inside, but I mean, I'll speak to it from, my vantage point, which is somebody who traveled inside as an outsider. And, Stateville closed the prison that we were working at in part because of toxic, lethal conditions, right? The water wasn't potable. It had Legionnaire's disease. Toxic to, Michael Broadway died. But many people had also died prior to, Michael Broadway's death due to extreme heat and cold. So the conditions there are toxic, lethal, conferring upon people who live at the prison, what, scholar and organizer Ruth Wilson Gilmore says, premature death on people. So the conditions are, it's hard to talk about the conditions for learning when the conditions for living are, horrific, right? But so it seems sort of kind of like a parenthetical to say there's no technology, people aren't allowed to type things up. People at that time weren't, we couldn't communicate with people. They're not allowed to. We had to bring in all the external resources, research papers. We had to have everything vetted, and the Department of Corrections often had us on the sort of hurry up and wait, waiting 6 months sometimes to get a book cleared, or having a book denied kind of randomly. But again, it feels sometimes trivial to kind of point to the conditions for teaching and learning as being, shitty, when the conditions for living, were horrific. So I want to make sure that we're not, we're noting that, not potable water, people on conditions of lockdown indefinitely sometimes. We would show up and get turned away, which, would be inconvenient and irritating, but people then would often be held in their cells, which are smaller than the bathroom, 4 days on end, right? So I think thinking about the conditions of the prison as a space whose job it is, the job of the prison is to confer premature death on people. So try not to lose that.
Yeah, I really liked how you kind of made that point of like, when we think of a typical college classroom, right, we think of like all these things that make it a conducive environment for learning, but prisons make that extremely difficult for individuals to actually have the space and to feel supported, when just their typical living conditions are so harsh. So then how do you get them like motivated to actually learn and be able to participate in these educational programs that are there for them.
And I'll just add is that when we started, I think 17 years ago, I teach at a relatively open access public university. If you can apply, you have, which means that it accepts, has a high acceptance rate because the mission is access, right? And which I believe in. I believe that universities or institutions of post-secondary education should have a radical mission of access. Again, my earlier point about meritocracy, being a logic we want to challenge. But when we started at the prison, both Logan and Stateville, the goal was to support people who had the least amount of access to services, which at the time were people serving long-term sentences. And again, Illinois has no parole. We have legislation called truth in sentencing, which means people serve a sentence of death by incarceration. And we started our, motley, raggedy collective started at these two prisons in part because those were the folks we wanted to be in community with. We had something to learn, and we felt like that was an important kind of place to build community. And anybody who wanted, sometimes we had space restrictions, but we weren't trying to filter people out. People who didn't have GEDs could come into our classes and were amazing. There wasn't necessarily a relationship between if you had a GED, you're smart, or if you didn't have a GED, you were smart, which is something, of course, I learned from, parts of my family, right? My family members who didn't finish high school are brilliant, right? So that's not, are smart, creative, thoughtful people. Sometimes people who have finished degrees, and have their GED or high school diploma or undergraduate degree are smart. Sometimes they're mediocre, sometimes they're not. So anyway, so we had our programs open access kind of at the prison. But as other academic programs began to come into the prison, and as the sort of context shifted in Illinois, the prison began to have more scrutiny about who can come into our programs. And I think that's that was a significant challenge for us in the last couple of years we operated at Stateville. Like, how do we didn't want to just make our programs, clearly our degree program, which was a small thing that we did, had to be only available for people with a GED. But then at that prison, people were waiting years to get into the GED program because the state runs the GED program. So people would come to us and say, I would love to be in your class, like in your conversations, your rooms, and your workshops, in your think tanks, but I don't have a GED. And in part, that's because, the state, has historically prioritized people with shorter sentences to get access to programs. So all that to say is that, the Department of Corrections can kind of work against, whatever kind of good intentions our programs have, right? They can often weaponize, so then we found ourselves in the last couple of years, we were at Stateville, the Department of Corrections, yanking people from our classes or using our programs as kind of like a carrot and a stick, kind of saying, well, we're gonna, which we didn't want, right. So that's one of the reasons we, have kind of stepped back from that work, because how do we see ourselves as antagonistic towards the Department of Corrections, like not trying to make them look better?
Yeah, for sure. And I really appreciate you kind of like touching on like, the work that you guys are doing is meaningful and it's changing lives, but there are some kind of, still like what ifs, and things that need to be kind of developed further. But yeah, we're going to go on a short commercial break, and then after we will begin exploring some more topics around education.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Introducing Next Generation Media Internship Program, designed for undergraduates, postgraduates, unemployed, dislocated workers, and WIOA participants. Our program offers remote virtual work experiences, qualifying as approved individualized career services. Learn while leading at your own pace, with part-time or full-time hours per week. Benefit from weekly debriefings and group supervision, along with our 15-minute masterclasses. Our projects include the Justice Beat Talk Show and the Just Us Youth Talk Show. Discover your gateway to success today.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and good morning again, Dr. Miners. So we just have a few more questions, and we're gonna keep the keep it going a little bit longer. So, okay. So our first question: can you please share a moment from inside one of these programs that captures the impact of this work?
Wow, great question. And thank you, Grace. And I know that I'm a little tricky to be interviewing this morning because I feel like you asked me these questions and then I tell this long conversation that's kind of slightly connected to the question and not. So I appreciate all of you. Moment. I mean, so I feel like the last time I was at Stateville, some comrades who were also inside with me for the day, Shireen and Eliza, wonderful folks. I can't remember what I was doing, but I came into a room and the two of them, we were like maybe in the last 45 minutes, we're playing hangman on the chalkboard. And also Shireen led everyone into a song because in part, we didn't know if that was going to be our last day there because the prison had been slated for closure for a while, but that closure was speeded up because of the, horrific death of Michael Broadway. Just to say that he asphyxiated, and was essentially executed by the prison because they, from medical neglect. And anyway, that's a just a tragic situation. And so we had to, people were finding out that they were going to be, transferred, largely shipped, away from the city, away from Chicago, away from loved ones, connections, relationship, and community. And so we had been treating kind of every visit as potentially the last visit. So I walked into this room and there was like a group of our people and Shireen was leading people in a song and I am not touchy-feely. And Eliza was playing hangman on the board. And it just, made me kind of laugh and feel, just feel a sense of connection. And also just that we could have that little moment, in that place, and we might not see people again. So that's not quite connected to teaching and learning, but it's kind of stuck in and that was the last time that we were there.
Wow, that's amazing. So what structural barriers make it difficult to expand prison education programs nationwide?
Well, I'm not, I think we're at a tricky moment. As I said right at the beginning of this call, we're at a really important moment in the United States where we see sort of a bipartisan, across states, a commitment to sort of absorbing, what the Department of Corrections would like to call education into its prison system. For example, I had the opportunity to visit northern Indiana last year, and they are rebuilding a prison that's going to have, and they're in its description of this prison, which is slated to open in 2027, which is going to hold 4,000 people. It's going to have, I think it's like 14,000 square feet of classroom space, and that new prison rebuild, in Indiana is the largest public infrastructure project in Indiana, right? And they initially said they were going to build this new prison because they were going to close some area prisons that were decrepit and in terrible condition. But then they announced that they're going to keep those decrepit area prisons open to hold migrants that they've pulled, from ICE snatches and abductions on the street. So I offer that example just to remind us of this kind of political moment that we're in, where states like Indiana, states like Illinois are rebuilding or building new prisons that they are listing in the PR materials. These are programming prisons that are going to have educational spaces. And I think we want to ask critical, hard, real questions about what does it mean that the largest public infrastructure project in the history of Indiana is this programming prison, right? Or that our Democratic, and Indiana Republican state, Illinois Democratic state, our Democratic supermajority state here in Indiana is rebuilding 2 new prisons and touting them as these sort of programming prisons. So I think we really want to be having a vision, for a future that is not about, where high quality or what they're saying counts as high quality, but free, prison for working poor people is behind bars. That's not a future. It's not a future that any of your listeners want. We want high quality, radical, useful, meaningful, affirming, free education in our neighborhoods, right? In our communities, right? Not, behind some enormous walls, right? So I think that's a really pivotal kind of question to be asking, wherever you are, right? As a listener.
Yeah.
And I can't remember your question. I just talked about what I wanted to talk about.
No, these questions are really, really important, as you mentioned. So kind of going along those lines, what recent policy changes have resorted Pell Grant access for incarcerated students, and how significant is that shift?
Yeah. The Clinton administration, in addition to pumping money into policing, and Chicago spends about 40% of its operating budget already on policing, but the Clinton administration pumped money into added police, prison construction, but also removed people's eligibility inside prisons for Pell Grants. It's just been reinstated, I think, last year. You probably will know better than I. And I think it's both. Of course, people everywhere, I like to say, merit access to high quality, affirming, public education that's free. So I think the issue is not necessarily the reinstatement, of the Pell Grants, but what like that conversation I was flagging earlier, like how are we thinking about this strategically, and what does this mean, in terms of the kind of futures we want to be working towards in the now to build, right? So I think that's critical. I also want to flag that, other policy changes, the increased censorship and surveillance of materials going inside. Illinois has just passed, despite, protest and organizing, and I don't have the exact language of the bill, which I'm sorry for, but a bill kind of requiring all materials that come inside now have to be electronic. Everything has to be scanned to go inside, which is, they're saying it's like ease and surveillance, but it's, or ease and security measures, but, it's also expensive and making profit for these, high-tech companies that are, now getting contracts with the state to kind of do all this, communications. So I think we want to be looking at, increased censorship of materials coming in and coming out. I think we want to be looking at this moment, at states that are saying that they're either doing programming prisons or, they're talking about San Quentin prison in California as a campus. They're describing its rebuild as that. We want to be looking at that language, asking critical questions, organizing, pushing back, right? And also fundamentally, bringing my point back to the quote from Devon Terrell early on. Most people that I know inside want access to, want to be free, want to have some ability to be, be accountable, if they've done harm in the communities that they came from, to be, they're someone's mother, someone's sister, someone's, partner, someone's cousin. They want to be in community getting those services, right? Getting that support, having those relationships. So I think we want to be asking questions about like why Illinois doesn't have parole, why we have legislation like truth in sentencing, why people, serve these death by incarceration sentences. How do we want to be having conversations and visions that are challenging those structural systems.
Yes. Thank you so much. How can universities ethically partner with correctional institutions without reinforcing harmful systems?
Great question. I don't know though. I always like to use this is maybe a little bit, it's a that Kenny Rogers song, you got to know when to hold them, you got to know when to fold them, you got to know when to walk away, know when to run, right? And I don't know that, well, I don't think universities can do that on their own, right? And I don't think any one person can do that. I think that these are ongoing collective conversations about where the line is, and, how do we know when to hold them? How do we know when to fold them? How do we know when to walk away? Because I think we can't, be a self-referential system. Like, I'm doing a good thing. This is working. This seems great. Right. So, and I think universities are also part of the problem of mass incarceration. We're trying to often suggest ourselves as the solution in this moment, but universities are spaces that, developed criminology, and programs and, take money, from Department of Homeland Security to figure out how to do surveilling, our Palestinian neighbors, right? So I feel like we want to not fall for the myth that universities are the solution, right? That universities are actually both complicit, in the production of, what people call mass incarceration. But following my comrade Dylan Rodriguez, I want to say we want to talk about it as, not mass incarceration, but targeted criminalization, right? Universities are both complicit in that, production, everything from the, minting the architects that design these systems, but also universities, can be insurgent engines to kind of challenge that, right? I think still, like, not all of us, not every day, but I think we got to see, like any work site, we have to see it as a place where we can use the tools. My other quote, the Annie DeFranco quote from the punk rock folk singer from the 90s, every tool is a weapon if you hold it right. Like, we got some things we can try, right? We can, do podcasts with radical students and get them to, collectivize, to make demands on their university, to do all kinds of things, right? So I think we need to, not fall for the line that post-secondary education, especially the best of the best places, are the ones that are going to fix the problem of mass incarceration. Rather, they're complicit in it, and what we got to do is have that analysis and then figure out, what are the insurgent things we can do.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Your knowledge on the topic is so admirable. I really enjoyed talking to you. And actually, another one of our associate producers is going to continue kind of asking you questions and talking to you. So thank you again.
I love that. Clearly, I'm talking a lot. Okay, great.
Hello, my name is Camilla, and I'm another intern here at Next Generation Media, and I'll be helping with the Q&A portion of today's episode, or what we call Maximizing the Moment. I want to begin by thanking you, Dr. Miners, for coming on today's show and speaking on the topic of education in the prison system. It honestly has been really enlightening to hear all this information. It's things that I haven't known before. So thank you so much for all that information. And I'd like to begin with the first question that we have from one of our viewers, which is, why is it so hard to garner support for education while incarcerated?
Yeah, I mean, I think the prison system, thanks for that question, and I think really important question, and great to meet you as well. I'm loving the backdrops, or it makes my little basement closet look so crappy, but great to see you. I want to just sort of slightly reframe that question, as I've been doing this morning, to say, just to remind ourselves what the prison, I like to use the term the prison industrial complex, or what the prison system is sort of designed to do. And it's designed to isolate people. It's designed to stigmatize people. It's designed to dehumanize people. And, to kind of reiterate a quote from Ruth Wilson Gilmore from earlier, it's really designed to confer premature death on people, right? And not just random people, but, those who have been marked as, by these, and I'm going to use some jargon here, by these systems of white supremacy, by these systems of heteropatriarchy and ableism and settler colonialism. When we look and see who's locked up, right, those are the bodies, people who are marked by white supremacy, people who are marked by ableism, right? It's not just random who's behind bars. So I think, the questioners, the person's great question is, why is it so hard? It's because these are systems that are kind of designed to dehumanize. They're designed to isolate. They're designed, like, how many times have we been in a prison waiting room, right, trying to get into that prison to see loved ones, and there's no public transit that goes to that place. The hours, it's randomly closed, even though we called that morning and it was open. People are, told that their pants are not appropriate because they're too tight, too loose, right? Or the infernal, question that I always get is like, are you wearing a real bra, right? Just like, yes, I am, right? So I feel like these places are designed to confer these systems of dehumanization, and that's not arbitrary. That's how they were built, right? That's the purpose of them. So then, but I just want to lift up, something that I haven't lifted up in the podcast, is that people inside are teaching and learning each other, are building a way out of no way. Thinking about the wonderful history of prison uprisings and prison organizations from. The book about when the prisoners organized in Walpole, from the Attica uprising, from Pontiac, from the Bedford Hills. There's so many important examples of people inside supporting each other, building hospice programs, teaching and learning, trying to do labor organizing, trying to challenge the heteropatriarchy or the white supremacy from the institution. So people inside do teach and learn, right? But the outside programs coming in is what I think your questioner is asking about. I think that there's not the purpose of the prison isn't to do that, and they don't really want to do that. Or if they do, they want to, what I like to say, weaponize it, like absorb these programs to try to use them as a carrot and a stick, right? So, which I think we want to be deeply, deeply critical about. Like, do we want our programs to be part of the apparatus of the prison industrial complex? No, right? I don't want, a program or an initiative or a group that I'm working with, to be, for the prison to be able to say, to use that as a weapon in their arsenal. But that was my long response to your short question.
Thank you for that. It's really just enlightening, a lot of information that brings into that question, such a simple question, but it's such a broad answer. So thank you for that. The next question that we have is, if someone listening is skeptical about abolition, where should they begin learning?
Great. Well, wonderful. I'm happy for that question. And skepticism is welcome, right? I think it's good to be skeptical. And hopefully that skepticism is going to get you to read and think about public policy or institutions like the prison or policing, right? And that skepticism might help you pull apart or kind of disaggregate, policing from public safety or borders from public safety. And I just think, like, in this moment, like, I'm encouraging that person, if you're in Chicago or Minneapolis or in DC or LA, you can see on the streets people pulling apart like the state from public safety. Like, I'm doing Ice Watch, at my neighboring elementary school 4 blocks away. And there are a whole range of everyday people, not just people who look like a little leprechaun like me with this hat on this morning, who are, with their whistles, that are out there, who recognize clearly that masked, armed men in unmarked vehicles who are, driving around the neighborhood, snatching people off the street is not public safety, right? So abolition is really, the push towards abolition is asking us the really core important question: what makes our communities stronger and safer? What actually, is well-being for our communities? Is it more cops on the street with weapons, right? Is it, building more prisons? Is it a bigger border between us and other nations? Or is it, the kind of things that aren't rocket science, well-being in our communities? Is it, high quality, childcare programs? Is it, meaningful mental health care services that are affirming? Chicago has me closed under a previous mayor, free public health centers, right? And now our cops are the front line, or say that they're, the cops don't even want to be the frontline mental health service providers. So I just raise that to say that, to lift up the questioner's question about, I'm skeptical, but great. I mean, transfer that skepticism to public policy, transfer that skepticism into the, 24 hours of Law and Order TV shows that we have all been fed, to say, and ask ourselves, what makes my community stronger and safer? Is it really the blue light surveillance cameras on the block, or is it the relationship that I might be able to build with my neighborhood, my neighbor, right? What actually might make me feel safer? Is it, more, another prison in Illinois, or is it actually, the feeling that, I'm not going to face racism or homophobia when I leave my house, right? So, and, cops aren't going to fix, the racism or homophobia, that's in the street, but what might, right? Or, I think we're seeing this, gender and sexual violence in this moment as like one of the, we need more cops because there's an increase in gender and sexual violence, but, there's nothing in the history of policing, that actually says that that's going to solve it, right? So what actually might stop, the Epstein class and all their friends from harming young women? What actually might do that? Is it police? It certainly didn't work, for the last century. So what might, how might challenging white supremacist heteropatriarchy, actually make our communities stronger and safer? So abolition is like getting into the root of the question, right? The most important question that we want to be asking. And I welcome skeptics, right? That's what we want to do. But let's also have skepticism, about what's being told to us as is our well-being, is our healing, or our safety, right? Because that's not true. We know that. Right?
Thank you so much for that. That was honestly really powerful, and just so, like, I like how you mentioned getting in at the root of the question, which is something that even now, like at Adler, where a lot of us are currently students at that university, we're learning about that, going to at the root of the question, at the root of the problem, to try to get it at the core. So Thank you for that.
Right. Cool. And students, best place to be skeptical, right? What's that line? Another wonderful line from Dr. Angela Davis, like, how do we ask questions that let us see beyond the given, right? So, like, how do we, or Marie Matsuda, how do we ask the other question, right? So skepticism is our friend, I think, in this moment. Cool. Great to talk to so many students.
Yes. So we're actually going to head into our recap section right now.
Okay, great.
So today's conversation reminds us that prison education is not simply about degrees, it's about dignity, identity, and possibility. So we have explored how programs like University Without Walls and the Northwestern Prison Education Program brings rigorous higher education into spaces. We discussed how abolition is not just about tearing systems down, but about building alternatives rooted in care and opportunity. We have also examined how education can shift not only individual trajectories, but public narratives about justice. So finally, as we wrap up today's episode, one thing is clear: education and the justice system are deeply intertwined, whether we acknowledge it or not. Dr. Miner's work challenges us to reconsider what accountability looks like, what opportunity looks like, and what transformation truly requires. Prison education isn't about leniency, it's about expanding access to learning, fostering intellectual growth, and recognizing the humanity of people within systems that often strip that humanity away. Dr. Miners, thank you again for sharing your expertise and for the work you continue to do at the intersection of education and justice. And thank you to our listeners for tuning into the Justice Beat. This episode sparked questions for reflection. We encourage you to keep learning, stay curious, and think critically about how justice systems can better invest in education and opportunity. Be sure to follow us for future episodes, and we'll see you next time on the Justice Beat podcast.
Can I make 3 quick pitches at the last minute after that amazing end?
Yes.
One is check out the No New Prisons campaign in Illinois. Google it. It's an amazing organization that's trying to build the futures we know we need. 2, if you're curious about abolition, if you're skeptical and you want to look, check out Critical Resistance. Got lots of wonderful educational, pedagogical materials. And 3, study and struggle with your colleagues, comrades, friends, neighbors, family. You know, we need you to build the world that we need now, and so appreciative. And thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you.
Great. Ready on the stump? Yeah. Okay. Here we go. I am somebody. I am somebody. I may be poor. But I am somebody. I may be young. But I am somebody. I may be on welfare. But I am somebody. I may be small. But I am somebody. I may make a mistake. But I am somebody. My clothes are different. My face is different. My hair is different. But I am somebody. I am black, brown, white. I speak a different language. But I must be respected, protected, never rejected. I am God's child. I am somebody. Give yourself a big hand.